All right, let's talk about the New Age. You've heard the words, right? Crystals, chakras, the age of Aquarius. It's all part of our cultural wallpaper. But what does it actually mean? Well, that is the big question, isn't it? And you're about to find out that the answer is way more complicated and, frankly, more interesting than you might think. So, let's just get right to it. What exactly is the New Age? If you're hoping for a neat, tidy, one-sentence definition, well, you're going to be disappointed. It turns out even the experts who spend their lives studying this stuff have a really hard time pinning it down. I mean, just look at this quote from the scholar Darren Kemp. It really nails the problem. You ask a Christian apologist, they might say it's a cult. Ask a historian, and they'll say it's an ancient tradition. A sociologist sees a new religion, a psychologist might see narcissism. They're all looking at the same thing and seeing something completely different. So the New Age isn't just one thing, it's a puzzle. And today, we're going to try and put the pieces together. Okay, so let's start solving this puzzle. The very first piece we need to understand is why it's so tricky to define. Are we talking about a religion, a philosophy? What kind of box does this even fit in? Well, here's the thing. Most scholars today have landed on a really interesting idea. They say the New Age isn't a movement in the traditional sense, with a leader and a manifesto. It's better to think of it as a milieu, a kind of cultural atmosphere or a shared environment of ideas. It's fluid, it's decentralized, and that's why it's so hard to grab onto. So, if it's this cultural atmosphere, where in the world did it come from? To get that, we have to become spiritual detectives and trace its incredibly eclectic roots. And let me tell you, they go way back and pull from some really unexpected places. And this is where it gets wild. The New Age is a true spiritual melting pot. I mean, look at this timeline. It's pulling from 18th century mysticism, 19th century stuff like spiritualism, and then boom, 1950s UFO religions. Seriously. Then you get to the 1960s, and the counterculture throws in a huge dose of Eastern spirituality and the human potential movement, and it all just combusts into this perfect storm that we now call the New Age. This quote is a real mic drop moment. It basically says, hey, all this new stuff, it's not actually that new. Most of the core ideas were already floating around by the late 1800s. The new part isn't about inventing brand new concepts. It's about repackaging and blending all these older spiritual traditions for a modern world. Okay, so with all these different roots, you're probably wondering, is there anything that holds this all together? And the answer is yes. Let's dig into the core beliefs that tend to pop up again and again across this really diverse scene. So what's the glue? It really boils down to a few powerful ideas. First, and this is absolutely crucial, is self-spirituality, the idea that you are your own guru. You don't need a priest or a book to tell you what's true. Then there's holism, the feeling that everything, from a star to a person to a rock, is deeply interconnected. That leads right into the third point. If everything is connected, then the divine isn't some old man in the sky, it's also inside of you. And finally, there's this really optimistic idea of evolution, that the whole universe, including us, is moving toward a higher, better state of consciousness. And that idea of evolution brings us to the famous age of Aquarius. This is where the whole thing gets its name. The belief is that humanity is astrologically shifting gears, moving out of the dark, conflict-ridden age of Pisces and into a brand new golden era of peace, love, and enlightenment. It's a profoundly hopeful vision for the future. So you have the beliefs, but what about the things people actually do? Well, one of the most well-known practices is called channeling. This is the idea that a person can basically act like a radio receiver for messages from another dimension, from beings like angels, spirit guides, or even ETs. Books that were supposedly channeled, like A Course in Miracles or The Seth Material, became massive hits and had a huge influence on the whole scene.
And you absolutely cannot talk about the New Age without talking about healing. It is central. But we're not just talking about getting rid of a headache. The idea is holistic, balancing your mind, your body, and your spirit. Practices like Reiki, which works with the body's energy centers, or chakras, became super popular because they tapped into this deep desire for alternative ways to think about health and well-being.
But then, right around the 1990s, a plot twist happens. The New Age starts to morph from this distinct subculture into something else. Something much more diffuse and something you could find in the shopping mall. It became a cultural vibe and a massive commercial market. Just look at the shift here. In the 70s and 80s, people might have actually called themselves New Agers. It was an identity. But by the 90s, the term itself started to sound a little cheesy, maybe even cringe. And here's the paradox. Just as people stopped using the label, the core ideas, meditation, yoga, crystals, holistic health, went completely mainstream, just under new packaging like spirituality or wellness.
And, of course, this was all fueled by a booming market. Suddenly, there were mind-body-spirit conventions in every major city. Shops popped up selling crystals, incense, and stacks of self-help books. You had a whole industry of workshops, therapies, and music. Spirituality wasn't just a search anymore. It was a product.
This whole commercial boom led to what some have called supermarket spirituality. You can almost picture it, right? You walk down the aisles and pick and choose what you like. I'll take a little bit of Buddhism, a dash of Celtic folklore, maybe some ideas from quantum physics. You get to create your own bespoke spiritual path, completely free from any strict rules or dogma. So who exactly is shopping in this spiritual supermarket? Well, study after study shows a pretty consistent demographic. Participants tend to be white, middle class, and have a good education. And as you can see here, there's a pretty significant gender gap, with about 2/3 of the people involved being women. So, what's the final verdict on all this? What's the lasting impact? Well, the story of the New Age isn't just one of growth and mainstream acceptance. It's also been a lightning rod for some really significant criticism and controversy. The criticisms really come from all sides. From mainstream Christianity, the big issue is often the focus on the self, which is seen as putting the individual in the place of God. From the modern pagan community, you'll hear critiques about the super high fees some gurus charge, and a feeling that it's all a bit too love and light, ignoring the darker, messier parts of nature. But maybe the most serious and painful criticism comes from Indigenous communities who have pointed to widespread cultural appropriation, the taking and selling of sacred traditions by what they call plastic shamans. But when you step back and look at the big picture, perhaps the single biggest legacy of the New Age is how it paved the way for the massive spiritual but not religious demographic we see today. It perfectly captured this modern desire to have a sense of meaning and connection, but without the old institutions and rules. It's spirituality tailor-made for an individualistic culture. Which brings us to our final big question to chew on. Did the New Age just fizzle out when people stopped using the term? Or did it actually win? Did it just dissolve so completely into our mainstream culture that we don't even see it anymore? Is it hiding in plain sight in our yoga classes, our meditation apps, and our wellness blogs? That's some worth thinking about.